Did a wall of water wash away all traces of the city of Atlantis? No. Yes. Maybe. Welcome to the In-Between. I'm Carol Ann, and this is the second half of our investigation to uncover the true historic location of Atlantis. Today's task is to finish our list of evidence that the Richat Structure just might be X marks the spot for the true location of the lost capital city of Atlantis that we started in the last video. So buckle up, because we are taking another ride back to the Richat Structure. In part 1, we gave you compelling evidence that suggests Atlantis was not just some allegory or myth made up by Plato, but showed a ton of historical and physical evidence of Atlantis as a vast and thriving ancient civilization that once existed throughout Western and Southern Africa. We followed ancient clues and modern-day discoveries to the doorstep of the Richat Structure, a mysterious geological formation that might just be the site of Atlantis's fabled capital city. If you missed out on the first part of this incredible journey, don't worry. Just click on the link in the description to catch up, because we are picking up right where we left off. Here in part 2, we're going to deal more with the geology and the geography of the site and how the physical history of the area lends credence to the idea that this just might be the spot that Plato and many others told us about all those years ago. Okay, so what is the Richat Structure? The ultra short version is it's a 100 million year old collapsed volcanic dome that left nearly perfect concentric rings when it popped. Now, there are some that say that it isn't a volcanic dome, that it came from a gigantic plasma strike from another giant celestial body coming very close to Earth, close enough to electrically connect. But no matter how it formed, and now it sits in the middle of the Sahara Desert, about 300 miles from the western coastline of Africa, in what is now the country of Mauritania. French geologists Theodore Monod and Richard Mollard studied the area in the 1940s and 1950s, but it wasn't until the 1965 Gemini 4 space mission that we got our first good overhead look at the structure. And testing done in the 60s on the rocks that compose the structure found no evidence of the kind of change in the rock that is only created by sudden heat and high pressure. So it's not an impact crater. It is highly eroded, but interestingly, the Wikipedia page that talks about it doesn't give any opinion as to what those erosion forces might have been. But then again, 100 million years is a long time to be sitting there baking in the sun. The number of changes that area has been through in that time is pretty staggering. I mean, the entire western chunk even separated for a while with what is called the Trans-Saharan Seaway sometime between 150 million years ago, so after the Richat Structure was born. And the whole desert itself has gone from a desert environment to hot, humid, lush, and green numerous times over millennia. This current dry stage is only roughly 5,000 years old, a mere blink of the geologic eye. Before that, which would be when Atlantis is said to have existed and perished, it was mostly in the lush and green phase. It had water everywhere, with lots of lakes and even a couple mega lakes like Mega Lake Chad, which at its height was the biggest freshwater lake ever, bigger than all of the North American Great Lakes combined by an additional 50%. In fact, one of those mega lakes was Lake Tritonus, that is rumored to have existed up in the northern area of Africa, around Tunisia and or northern Algeria. Some scholars believe that this may have been the body of water that was needed to be crossed to get to Atlantis, giving Atlantis its status as an island. What does that have to do with the Richat Structure? Not much. But as a Star Wars fan, I just wanted to point out that the area they think Lake Tritonus existed in is also the childhood home of one Luke Skywalker. There are all kinds of maps showing some of the lakes and even the larger rivers that used to flow over the dry sand. One of those larger rivers, or river networks, was the Tamanrasset. This thing was so big that it could pretty much connect anything in the upper Saharan area from the Atlas Mountains all the way down to south of the Richat. In fact, the system was so big that if it were still here today, it would rank 12th among the top 50 largest drainage basins worldwide. And it moved so much water that it created what is known today as the Cap Timoris Canyon, which is a 250-mile or 400-kilometer long submarine channel system that starts just past the Bay of Arguin. Now, to get all of that water together would have taken lots of feeder rivers. Is it possible that one of those feeders went next to the Richat? I wouldn't think that that's out of the question, especially when we can see evidence not far away of not only a lake, and a pretty big one at that, but also of what is possibly a man-made canal that would bring that water over to the eye side of the plateau. It certainly has the salt or mineral deposits that you would expect to see on the bottom of a dry lake bed. But if you look at the edges, the horizontal striations show that this was most likely a shoreline. And if we back out just a bit, we can see this line right across the middle. I have no idea what that is, but a straight line in the middle of a lake doesn't happen very often in nature. And here's a better look at that possible canal. Does that look natural? Or did someone dig this? We can see along the neighboring plateau ridge plenty of evidence of water moving across the land. And looking at the current topography, is it really a stretch to think that the riverbed here in yellow could have connected to the rings of the Richat? I don't think so. All it would take is one water source flowing down the plateau, which looks like there were many, to fill the rings with water and flow out the other side again. Then something shifted in the grand scheme of global climate around 5,000 years ago that dried up the entire area into the vast desert we see today. But that warming is part of a regular cycle of dry and wet that the Sahara is now known to go through. The question we need to answer is, if the Richat Structure is the site of the city of Atlantis, how did it get destroyed? That is the million-dollar question. Well, if you believe that the Richat Structure is the lost city of Atlantis, then it obviously didn't sink to the bottom of the ocean. So how would the demise of inhabitants of an island structure happen in a way that would match Plato's description of,
"And in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth"?
How about a giant cataclysmic wall of water? Think that's not possible? Think again. Now, a lot of people talk a lot about something called the Younger Dryas as probably having something to do with whatever events happened to cause the flooding of Atlantis. The Younger Dryas was a period from approximately 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, give or take a few years, when the Earth's temperatures dropped dramatically for 1,000 years. That part we know is a fact. What we don't know is why, and why the temperatures came roaring back at the end. Fun fact for today, the younger, older, and oldest Dryases are named for a flower. Dryas octopetala, better known as white dryads or mountain avens. These beautiful little white flowers love the cold, so thrive in cooler temperatures. So by measuring the amount of the pollen present in ice core samples, we can tell that the years with the high Dryas octopetala pollen counts were years of cooler temperatures. But the more I think about it, I'm starting to think that whatever happened to end the period of the Younger Dryas is coincidental to what happened to the city of Atlantis, even though the end of the Younger Dryas happened about the same time as the calamity at Atlantis. And let me just say right now that I'm not even pretending to have all the answers. I don't think it's possible that we ever will, but I know what I see. And what I see is water. Lots of water. Pictures of the area surrounding the Richat Structure and the Adrar Plateau from space show evidence of large-scale scouring of the surface. This scouring does not come from the wind. The windiest place on Earth is Cape Denison in Antarctica. And it's also nice and flat like the area around the Richat. But we see nothing like the scouring we see in Africa. Also, water is known to create ripples as it moves over sand. We know that Washington State had a massive flood event called the Missoula Flood because they still have those same ripples, only on a much bigger scale. And guess what? We see the same ripples in the sand at Mauritania. Now, some of you may jump on Google Earth, something I highly recommend, by the way. I can get lost in there for hours and take a closer look at Cape Denison. And if you scroll in, you will see some rippling happening in the snow. But, like I said last time, the devil is in the details. The ripples in Mauritania are readily visible at an altitude of 10 miles. The ripples in Cape Denison can only be seen at close range, 4,000 feet. If you zoom out to the same 10-mile altitude like we did in Africa, they disappear, showing only a white, flat plain, which, if you notice, is also devoid of the scour marks that we see in Africa as well. Clearly not the same geological forces at work here. Now, if you follow the work of the OzGeology YouTube channel, who has done some awesome work on ancient tsunami detection, you will know that, according to him, the ripples are not the answer. The chevrons are. Chevrons are V-shaped areas of sediment deposits that a tsunami drops off as it loses strength as it goes inland. The good news? The Sahara has those as well. Lots of them, extending hundreds of miles in from the coast. But let's go back to scour marks for a moment. We also have that same scouring happening on the eastern side of the continent, where we can see Imikusi, a 1,000,000-year-old volcano and the highest point in the Sahara at 11,000 feet. Its last magma flow is dated to somewhere between 12 and 14,000 years ago. If we zoom out a bit, we can see the scour pattern actually flows around both sides of the volcano. And if we take a closer look, we can see the scour lines run over the top of the flow field. So they had to have happened after that flow 12 to 14,000 years ago. Now, we have to thank Jimmy Corsetti and his YouTube channel, Bright Insight, for a lot of this research. But at this point, I'm going to diverge from Jimmy's opinion on one point. He mentions the salt deposit inside the caldera of Imikusi as something that would have been deposited during this major saltwater event. But I gotta disagree with him on this one. Imikusi is 11,000 feet or 3.3 kilometers tall, and I just don't think the wave would have been that big. I think the salt deposits are more likely to be from water springing up from inside the caldera itself. And while I don't think the salt in Imikusi necessarily tells us anything, we have salt in plenty of other places that do. The Saharan region is known for its huge salt deposits, no doubt in part from that trans-Saharan seaway that cut the continent in two. But we are not looking at the deep deposits. We are looking at the stuff hanging out on the surface. Let's take another look at those same sand ripples we saw earlier. See the white areas in between? That's salt. And we can see more salt inside the ring structures of the Richat Structure as well. And the thickest salt deposits are in the lowest lying areas, like the places where water would settle as it's drying out. And speaking of salt, all of the surface wells in the area are full of salt water. Now, whether that is because huge amounts of seawater washed over the land and percolated down into the shallowest water tables, or it's another lingering effect of the enormous amount of seawater that used to flow through here, I don't know. But you have to dig down over 600 feet to get to fresh water. But according to the documentary Visiting Atlantis, which you can only watch exclusively on the Gaia Network, link below, there's one well in the center of the Richat Structure, and just like Plato said,
a well near the central Acropolis provided the city with fresh water.
It's a fresh water well. Another argument against this being the site of any civilization is the fact that there's no visible evidence of anything ever being there. But considering that the people in the region built their houses using rocks and mud, if a biblical amount of water came through, there would be nothing left to see, just rocks. Rocks that Plato said,
and the stone they quarried beneath the central island all round, and from beneath the outer and inner circles, some of it being white, some black, and some red.
And those white, black, and red stones are everywhere. That's pretty much all there is as far as the eye can see. And just because we can't see anything in the pictures, doesn't mean it's not there. There's never been any effort to excavate the site. Now, seeing as though it's 14 miles or 25 kilometers across, that would be a daunting task. But from what I understand, digging there is actually not allowed. So there goes any chance of finding that evidence. That being said, there actually is something left over. The area is a treasure trove of artifacts that can't be tied to any known civilization at this point, including stone spheres that are cut with a high degree of precision, and weights that look like ones known to be used for fishing nets. Why would people need fishing net weights unless they are surrounded by water? Okay, question. So if there was this big wall of water that washed everything away, where's the debris? Answer: in the ocean. It's called the Mauritania Slide Complex, which is actually two huge areas just off the western edge of Africa, right out from the Bay of Arguin, where gigantic piles of mud and debris were deposited on either side of the Cap Timris Canyon, where all that water cut the huge channel. When did all of this mud collect there? About 11,000 years ago. And for those of you keeping score, that's right about when Plato said Atlantis was destroyed. Now, one problem with the tsunami theory is that the Richat Structure is currently about 1,300 feet or over 400 meters above sea level. That's a mighty tall wave, but that's where it currently sits. That doesn't mean that's how high it was 11,000 years ago. And I hear you barking, big dog. Tectonic plates move super slow. I know, but we know that Antarctica is rising at a rate of 1.6 inches per year right now. And 1,300 feet divided by 11,700 years is only 1.3 inches per year. So Africa rising to that height in that time frame is certainly doable. But what if the tectonic plate didn't do a slow rise like Antarctica is doing, but it had a series of bigger jumps? Follow me here. We know that the African plate is subducting under the Eurasian plate. In fact, those two plates hitting is what created the outer edge of the Atlas Mountains on the north coast. So this subduction, when one plate is sliding under the other, also makes for an active volcanic and earthquake-prone area. It's one of the 4 most earthquake-prone regions in the world, and the people of Crete and Pompeii will tell you that the volcanoes are there in the neighborhood as well. And the creation of the structure itself, along with the Canary and Cape Verde Islands, shows there's plenty of magma rolling around under the surface that is capable of affecting the land above it. So with all of that plate activity, it's hard to predict what's going to happen. And just to give you an idea of what can happen, take a look at the Noto Peninsula in Japan. They were just hit with an earthquake on January 1st, 2024. Happy New Year to you! With a magnitude of 7.6. That little jostle they felt was enough to raise the land underneath them by 3.5 feet and push them to the west almost 4 feet in just a few minutes. There are now oceanfront condos that are 800 feet from the ocean. So the last question to answer is, where did all of this water come from? Well, I think that based on the marking left on the surface of the land, probably points to a flow of water moving from east to west, which would point to something huge happening in the Mediterranean Sea. Does the Mediterranean have enough water for that? Yup. The average depth of the Mediterranean Sea is about 5,000 feet or 1,500 meters. So it's not as deep as the bigger oceans, which average about 12,000 feet or 3,700 meters. But it does have its deep spots, like Calypso Deep in the Ionian Sea, which is just over 17,000 feet or 5,200 meters deep. So that's a lot of water. And considering the 6-mile wide rock that hit the earth and killed the dinosaurs could have created a tsunami thousands of feet high, I don't think it's a stretch to say that a smaller meteor, say 2 miles across, could have potentially pushed a wall of water several hundred feet high over the surface of Africa. In fact, OzGeology, who we talked about a little earlier in looking for the sediment chevrons, is looking at a possible impact crater right in the Mediterranean just to the southeast of Italy, which makes it right in line with the chevron deposits he found in northern Africa. So is this theory provable? No. We do have plenty of factual evidence, but a lot of it is circumstantial. And for the time being, at least, we're just gonna have to keep digging and connecting dots where we can until the day someone finds that one piece of irrefutable evidence that can tie everything else together. And I think if this actually is the historical Atlantis, the evidence is out there somewhere. We just gotta find it. For example, as I was falling down yet another Google Earth rabbit hole, I found this on the edge of the Richat Structure. What? Can I say with 100% certainty that this is man-made? No, I can't. In fact, I found spots on the other side of the structure that look pretty similar as far as collections of rocks that look like thin slate, for lack of a better term. But this looks way too organized to be natural. But I don't know. What do you guys think? I do think we need to have more boots on the ground and just off the coast, combing every inch of the area to look for signs of ancient civilization. Maybe they're there, and considering the enormous amount of land we're talking about, we just haven't stumbled across them yet. I had never even heard of this place until we were researching our Atlantis video a few weeks ago. So I'm pretty sure there are plenty of other people out there who are hearing about this for the first time too. And I think that sharing this information to those who are in the same boat can only be a good thing. The more awareness we bring to the Richat Structure as a possible site for the location of the ancient city of Atlantis, the more people we can get out there to start looking for that needle in the haystack we would need to find to put an end to the question once and for all. Big shout outs to Jimmy Corsetti, David Stig Hansen, and OzGeology for their excellent research. Links to their channels are in the description below. Make sure you go and check them out. If you haven't seen the other 2 videos we have on the subject of Atlantis, you can click here for a general overview of Atlantis, or here for part 1 on Atlantis and the Richat Structure. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.